So good evening and welcome everyone to the January 22nd, 2024 Prince George's County Historical Society's History Chat. All roads lead to, sorry about that. All roads lead to Bladensburg. My name is Donna Schneider. I'm the president of this society. We are recording this chat, so please mute your microphones, and we will, as I said, record it, and you'll be able to find this recording on our YouTube channel, which you can find on our website, www.pghistory.org. We will have a Q&A session at the end of the chat, so please put your questions in the chat box, and we will get to as many as possible. Tonight's chat is about old roads within Prince George's County with former society historian Alan Virta and our current historian Susan Pearl. Alan has been a member of the society for 50 years, joining when he was a student at the University of Maryland. He is the author of Prince George's County, a pictorial history. He was the editor of the Society newsletter for 12 years and has received 2 of our St. George's Day awards. In 1982, Alan became the first chairman of the county's Historic Preservation Commission. By profession, he is an archivist and worked at the Library of Congress and the University of Southern Mississippi. He moved to Boise, Idaho in 1988 and was the head of special collections and university archivist at Boise State University until his retirement in 2011. Even though he lives 2,000 miles away, his main research interest is still Prince George's County, which the society can definitely attest to because he usually visits our DeMar Library whenever he comes back to the county to visit his family. So thank you, Alan, for joining us this evening. And Susan, I will turn it over to you.
Okay. Alan, it's great to have you here, even though you're 2,000 miles away.
I'm in snowy Boise.
What? You're still in Boise? Yes. Well, it's amazing to me to remember that you are 2 miles away because we see you frequently. Each year you come home. Thank goodness you have family that draws. And it seems like we're always talking about some mystery of Prince George's history. As we did, of course, this year when you were here for Christmas, and we have on many occasions. To talk about roads near to and from
quieter if I can.
Bladensburg.
You are interesting, but
Everybody, please mute your microphones. Thank you.
Am I breaking up?
No, it's just we're hearing background noise.
Oh,
that's not you.
Yeah, and Bladensburg has been a subject of interest of us. 10 years ago, in 2014, we were involved in a symposium celebrating the bicentennial of the Battle of Bladensburg, and we had talks, including both of us, on a variety to do with Bladensburg, a very interesting historic in Prince George's County, so there's always a lot to talk about. But we never talked about the roads, the many roads that entered into Bladensburg, away from Bladensburg. I think, like me, most of your audience would immediately think of the 2 main roads. The road north, coming south from Baltimore to Bladensburg, which became a turnpike in 1813, and then went on down into the District of Columbia, and also the road from the east that many people used in the 18th and 19th century, now pretty much along the lines of but there are other roads, and it's going to be fun to hear you talk about them, give some hints to the history and some quotations from the historic personages who were kind enough to write about it. So we're looking forward to what you have to say.
Well, thank you, Susan. And should I start sharing my screen now?
Yes.
Okay. Hold your breath, everybody. I'm working on it. Got to scroll down here. All righty. Do you see the screen?
Yes, thank you.
Yes, perfect.
Okay. Very good. I guess what I'll begin then is telling you about some of the roads I'm investigating. I started doing land research and found out you really couldn't research very well the lands unless you knew the old roads. So that's what got me off of that tangent. And being retired, I can certainly have time to do these tangents. It's amazing what I can do from my desk in Boise, Idaho, all the resources of the Maryland State Archives, many other places, the databases like Ancestry.com, Family Search, and the like, PGAtlas.com. There's many sources that can be tapped into Prince George's County history from a distance of 2,000 miles away. But what I'll do now is talk about some of my projects. And I know when I brought it up, Susan said, what do you mean all roads lead to Bladensburg, and why do they do that? And so I thought I'd better answer that question. And the very glib answer, first though, let me show you this 1794 map of Maryland done by Dennis Griffith. It shows some of the major roads coming into Bladensburg. I outline them in red. They're not naturally in red like that. But the glib answer to why all roads lead to Bladensburg is because all roads used to lead to Belltown before Bladensburg was there, and Bladensburg just inherited it. Belltown was a town established in about 1727 on the banks of the Northwest Branch, just a little above Bladensburg, and it naturally was a site that attracted traffic because it was a town, but it also importantly was a very easy, really the first place one could ford easily the Eastern Branch or the Anacostia River, without a bridge. And so Belltown was established there. Unfortunately, and it was established up on the hill above the Northwest Branch, but it was too far from the ship landing, and the river silted in so quickly that not very many ships could get up there, and the area became undesirable. So in 1742, a new town was established further down the river at Garrison Landing, and that's known as Bladensburg. This is a 1739 survey before Bladensburg was built, one of the pages of it, and you can see all the roads on the left there leading from Belltown to Mr. Snowden's works, from Belltown to Seth's Hyatt, et cetera, et cetera. So there already was quite a road network in 1739 going down to Belltown that Bladensburg just inherited. Now, in my research, trying to pin these roads down, I used a number of sources. One of the most important was Moore and Jones's Traveler's Directory, which was a series of strip maps showing the road from Philadelphia down to Washington. Though that volume is online at Princeton University. And you can see how the maps were constructed. They don't go, they're kind of like the AAA triptychs that you can get from the AAA that outline your path, but they don't go very far off it. The most you get are maybe little indications of side roads, but that gives wonderful detail about many of these roads. Here's a more modern map with more of those roads sketched in. I'm not going to go into all of them, but you can see the the road network coming into Bladensburg. And these are all.
Alan, somebody's on their microphone and we're getting a lot of feedback. So please mute your microphones, everybody. Thank you.
Okay. Very good. This is a modern map with even more of the 18th century roads inked in. And if you're familiar with the map of the metro routes going into Washington, how they're kind of like I don't know what you call it, but they all feed into one place. Well, Bladensburg was a place in the 18th century in this region. This was the plat of Bladensburg as it was established. You see two main streets, and I don't know, can you see my cursor? Anybody?
Yes, we can see it.
Okay, this is Baltimore Avenue, Route 1. This is Annapolis Road, Route 450. This is Peace Cross down here, which was then a public landing. And I have never been able to determine if Peace Cross actually would be sitting in the water in the 18th century or not, but it's pretty close. Bladensburg was a bustling place. This is not a true picture of Bladensburg, but a sort of idealized picture of a colonial wharf in Virginia and Maryland. But I imagine it looked quite a bit like this with the ocean-going vessels coming right to it. There were a lot of historic sites in Bladensburg. Some of them are still with us. You see Bostwick on the left, the George Washington House, which was then Jacob Wirt's brick store, and the Market Master's house, all still there. These were huge photos that used to hang in the Bladensburg branch of Citizens Bank of Maryland. The last I saw them, they were in the Town Visitor Center over on Edmondson Road. Here are a couple more that aren't with us. Wooden structures, the Carlton Mill, which used to be right over in Cottage City, right across the bridge, and some unidentified wooden house. Now I'm going to look at some of the roads in Bladensburg, at least begin through the eyes of one of its most notable residents, and that's William Wirt. William Wirt came to national, he was born in 1779, but he came to national attention as a prosecutor in the Aaron Burr case in 1807. He became Attorney General of the United States in 1817. He served for 12 years under both James Monroe and John Quincy Adams, the longest serving Attorney General in American history. He was a third-party candidate for president in 1832 under the banner of the Anti-Masonic Party, though he's been characterized as the most reluctant presidential candidate in our political history. Nevertheless, he did carry one state, Vermont, winning their electoral votes. William Wirt was born, I think I said 1779 at first, but it was 1772. His father owned a tavern, billiard parlor, and the brick store now known as the George Washington House. He spent the first 7 years of his life in Bladensburg before being sent off to further his education in Georgetown. Eventually, he moved to Virginia, where he began his legal and political career. He's commemorated in Prince George's County by the William Wirt Middle School in East Riverdale. Wirt was a writer, publishing books and essays. He also wrote about his childhood in Bladensburg. Some of the reminiscences were published in John Pendleton's Kennedy's biography entitled The Memoirs of William Wirt, first published in 1849, 15 years after Wirt's death. This biography has been republished many times in the ensuing 180 years, even editions in the 21st century. Now, the manuscript from which Kennedy extracted Wirt's childhood reminiscences are kept in the Wirt family papers at the University of North Carolina, and they've now very nicely published that manuscript online in digital format. If you make a close comparison of the manuscript to the book, It shows that Kennedy left out many passages, including one that I'll use to begin talking about some of the specifics of the roads leading to Bladensburg. Work wrote about a sentimental visit he made with his wife and children to Bladensburg in 1808, almost 20 years after he had moved away. And this is what he had to say. And you know, the vision of you people are blocking part of my screen. Can you read the underlined part? In 1808, one of the men who called on him was Adam Craig, who lived near the bridge as you now enter the town from Washington. His house is the first house on the right as you enter, presenting a stone chimney toward the street. Now, this passage is interesting for two reasons. First, he mentions the bridge that you now, and I emphasize the word now, enter the town from Bladensburg. And secondly, he mentions a landmark in Bladensburg, well known in that day, but no longer with us. First, the landmark. This photo, which was made into a postcard, I think, was labeled the Old Barren Homestead after a later owner. It was also featured in a drawing in Lossing's pictorial field book of the War of 1812. I've circled it in red. And you also see it in this photo of Water Street, that's Baltimore Avenue, in the 19th century. It's the house right here you see the big white chimney. So it was quite a landmark in that day, and William Wirt mentioned it. This is what the site today, standing from that bridge. It stood about where the Crossroads nightclub is, the brick building here, which in itself is quite historic in terms of the music history of the DC area. On the right, again, is the plat of Bladensburg with the lot that Adam Craig's house stood on, outlined in red. If you see it there, right at the corner of Water Street and West Street, which was Annapolis Road. But let's get back to the bridge. Wirt used the word now, that you now enter the town. And indeed, the bridge he was speaking of was not the bridge that he knew when he was a child. The bridge by which he entered the town in 1808 was about where the present bridge is now, at the Peace Cross. But when he was a child, there was not a bridge there. That was where the public landing was, where the ships came to load and unload cargo. Before the silting of the river, it was a much deeper and wider stream that could accommodate ocean-going vessels. On this map, which was made during the American Revolution by the French, when Rochambeau's army passed through Bladensburg, or Bladensburg as they mentioned it, shows the location of the bridge then. If you were down here at the public landing or Peace Cross, you'd have to go up Baltimore Avenue, cross the northeast branch, take a left on what is now Charles Armentrout Drive, and cross the northwest branch, and then proceed westward. Here is another view of it in the Traveler's Directory by Moore and Jones. Again, you can see from Bladensburg, first you cross the northeast branch, you hung a left, and then cross the much narrower northwest branch, and then proceeded west. Now, I think the major reason the bridge was located there must have been because the northwest branch was much narrower stream than the main branch, the Anacostia. So for about the first 60 years of Bladensburg existence, including Wirt's childhood, it was a pretty roundabout way of getting west out of Bladensburg. I've not been able to find any explicit statements about exactly when the first bridge at the present site was built, but it looks to me like it was about 1803 or 1804. And if anybody has more definite information, I'd certainly like to hear. In Judge Van Horn's history of Prince George's County, he writes, quote, on July 19th, 1804, the levy court, which was the county commissioners, directed Thomas Hewitt and Benjamin Lowndes to contract for and supervise the repairs of a bridge over the eastern branch near the store of Benjamin Lowndes in the town of Bladensburg, indicating that there was a bridge there. Several months earlier, on Christmas Day, 1803, Rosalie Calvert of Riversdale wrote to her father, quote, "They have made a wooden on the eastern branch where you said to put it, but it is not completely finished." Now, she wrote, they made a wooden on the eastern branch. Margaret Calcott, who edited Rosalie's letters for publication, supplied the word bridge, and I think she has to be right. I don't know what else it would have been that she was singling out. So that's when I think the main approach to Bladensburg from the west was relocated, making the big chimney of Adam Craig's house therefore a very notable landmark as you came in town. But for William Wirt's childhood, you had to take that roundabout route. Let's talk about coming into Bladensburg from the west. As Susan mentioned at the beginning, from the north and the east are well known, but it's a little trickier from the west. William Wirt spent a lot of time on the west side of the river when he was young in what are now the towns of Cottage City and Colmer Manor. One of the earlier schools he went to was over there, and he writes quite a bit about it. In later years, that's where his uncle Jasper Wirt kept a tavern. Moore and Jones help us pinpoint the location of that tavern. From deeds, we know that Jasper Wirt purchased 5/8 of an acre at the northeast corner of the tract of land known as Scotland. And this is a Moore and Jones map, which shows on the road coming out of Bladensburg, crossing the northwest branch, his tavern is located on the north side right along that road. And if you can't read it, that says tavern. A plat attached to a much later deed for the property in 1874 shows it on the north side of the road, just as on the Moore and Jones map of 1802. And it really helps us correlate it to the present day map. On this current day Google map, here's the same site. You can see that little piece of Jasper Wirt's land, the northeast corner of the tract of land called Scotland, right on the north side of Bunker Hill at the corner with 38th Street and Mount Rainier. There's a large rectangular building built right over the tavern site, which is now, I believe, these apartments. And so that's the story of Jacob Wirt's tavern site, as best I can determine. Now, since we've moved west of the river, let's look at the three main roads that led to Bladensburg coming from the west. They were 1, the road from Georgetown, 2, the road from Rock Creek Church, and 3, the road from the Eastern Branch Ferry, all joined together about a mile west or so of the Northwest Branch Bridge, forming what you might call a stem road, now called Bunker Hill Road, that led toward Bladensburg. But first, the road to Georgetown. This was probably the most traveled of the 3 roads because it led to the important port town on the Potomac River, now, of course, part of Washington, D.C. Georgetown was a thriving town in its own right for decades before the city of Washington was built. In many respects, Georgetown was a sister city to Bladensburg. Not only was it the closest town geographically, but there were strong bonds between the people of both towns. In a region dominated by tobacco planters, the mercantile class, who were preeminent in both Bladensburg and Georgetown, formed a close-knit social group of their own, doing business with each other, socializing with each other, marrying each other, and constantly going back and forth. This book details many of those ties, the Lowndes, the Peters, the Dicks, the Lairs, the Stoddarts, on and on. Though it's centered on Georgetown, it's still an essential book for anyone interested in the history of Bladensburg. Just wish someone would write a book like that centered on Bladensburg. Not all of that road exists anymore, but at its western end, it's preserved today as Florida Avenue Northwest. Washington is known as a city of long, straight avenues, but this part of Florida Avenue coming out of Georgetown takes a long, irregular arc. It's the exception to the rule because it was an ancient road that, in the absence of steam shovels and bulldozers, had to take the topography in account. And the legislation setting up the city of Washington specifically said that part of its northern boundaries would be the road from Georgetown to Bladensburg, and Florida Avenue there was its boundary. Now, on the eastern end, toward Bladensburg, Brentwood Avenue is part of the old road to and from Georgetown. Only parts of it exist in bits and pieces. A lot of it has been sort of subsumed under Rhode Island Avenue. The X at the top right indicates where Jasper Wirt's Tavern was. Now, as far as the middle part of the road, beyond Brentwood Avenue and going over to Florida Avenue Northwest, that part has been lost, sort of overtaken by it lies under the grid system of streets of Washington, D.C. It's gone. This is a view of the road to Georgetown, Brentwood Road in Woodridge, D.C. You're looking west towards Georgetown, and you can see that does sort of bend around. It's going to look more like a country road almost than a city street in Washington. The do not enter signs, though, on either side of the road would prevent you now from heading toward Georgetown in that way. This road to Georgetown faded away as the main transportation route after the city of Washington was built. The Postmaster General in the new city ruled that the mail stages had to come first to Capitol Hill before going to Georgetown. So another route, now known as Bladensburg Road, eclipsed it. I'll talk about Bladensburg Road a little later. The roads from the west or going west was the road to Rock Creek Church and beyond. It eventually headed to the Sugar Lands, which was near Sugarloaf Mountain and far northern Montgomery County. Rock Creek Church, more formally known as St. Paul's, was the parish church of Prince George's Parish, which at one time included all of Maryland north of the eastern branch of the Anacostia River. It stretched all the way to Pennsylvania originally. Was a site of worship since about 1712. The walls of the present structure date to about 1775, and I think the burial ground is perhaps best known today for the Adams Memorial, Saint-Gaudens's famous statue known as Grief. The road to okay, I'm a little mixed up here. Wait a second. The road to Rockville, or what's left of it, is known as Bunker Hill Road, so named because it passed near one of the Civil War forts that were built to protect Washington during the Civil War. And St. Paul's Church is not far from North Capitol Street, if you're ever looking for it. Here's a Google map that shows its course across Washington. As it approaches a church, Hawaii Avenue is probably as close as you can get to the path of the old road. The middle is lost to the metro and to the metropolitan branch of the B&O Railroad. Then it picks up part of Michigan Avenue, and then you see it's called Bunker Hill Road here again in Northeast Washington and into Prince George's County. The X again is Jasper Wirt's Tavern. The blue line at the bottom right is Brentwood Road, the road to Georgetown. This next slide is a close-up of what's called Bunker Hill Road in Mount Rainier. and Cottage City. This part of the current road that's known as Bunker Hill Road was really the stem road that led from the bridge at the northwest branch. And it's kind of confusing because in contemporary to Wirt's time, this part was really called the road to Georgetown. And then you didn't get to the road to Rock Creek until you got a little further on. But I think we do the best we can and try to sort it out. Now, once the Bladensburg Road was built, Bunker Hill Road was diverted down here, the solid red line toward the Peace Cross area. But originally it would have come this way, this dotted line, to cross the northwest branch. So finally, the third road on the west side of Bladensburg was a road to the Eastern Branch Ferry, which roughly followed the course of today's Bladensburg Road northeast down to that big intersection with Maryland Avenue, 8th Street, and Benning Road. South of that, heading actually toward the ferry, is now lost under the grid of Washington streets. The ferry over the wide Anacostia River was located near the present-day site of the Sousa Bridge, which carries Pennsylvania Avenue over the river. This is a work by Augustus Koellner depicting the Anacostia in 1839 down in that area. Now let's turn to the roads going north out of Bladensburg. This Google Street View is 42nd Place in Hyattsville. It's now an industrial strip, but it was once one of the major streets in town when it was called Locust Avenue. But it has a much older story than even that. To quote the Washington Star's Rambler in 1922, quote, "The lower end of that street called Locust Avenue was part of the first road between Baltimore and Georgetown, used long before the building of the Baltimore-Washington Turnpike," unquote. The Baltimore-Washington Turnpike, which dates from about 1814, 1815, that time period, of course, is now known to us as Route 1. This is the predecessor north from Route 1. A modern map shows its route. Of course, the railroad and Rhode Island Avenue was not there, but it came out of Bladensburg, and you turn left, and then you went up the old road into Hyattsville, and then it continue winding north. For at least 3 decades before the turnpike was built, the road thundered with the passage of stagecoaches carrying both passengers and the mail. This happens to be a Courier and I print from a little later date, but you get the idea of the stagecoaches that rumbled between Baltimore and Washington. The road was not the straight arrow path that Route 1 is today. It meandered about. Odell Road east of Route 1, as it exists today, was the route of the road at that time, and it led to a bridge leading across the Patuxent to Snowden's Ironworks, which was a major industrial site in Maryland. Again, this sketch is from Rochambeau's Army papers made as they marched toward the north. One of the notable landmarks along the way was and still is Montpelier Mansion. And let me go back for a second. The tiny red dot down toward the bottom is, I believe, Montpelier. One of the notable visitors at Montpelier was Abigail Adams. She wrote about her visit in 1800 this way, quote, "Last winter there was a gentleman and lady in Philadelphia by the name of Snowden, whose hospitality I heard much of. I was advised at Baltimore to make their house my stage for the night, but I, who have never been accustomed to quarter myself and servants upon private houses, could not think of it, particularly as I had with me 10 horses and 9 persons. I therefore ordered the coachman to proceed. We had got about a mile when we were stopped by the Major Snowden in full speed, who had learnt I was coming on and had kept watch for me with his horse at the door. He could see or hear traffic on that road. In the kindness, again quoting her, in the kindness and most politest manner, he urged my return to his house, represented the danger of the road and the impossibility of my being accommodated in any inn I could reach. A mere hovel was all I should find. I pled my number. That was no objection. He could accommodate the double that number. There was no saying no, and I returned to a large, handsome, elegant house where I was received with my family and with what we might term true English hospitality. But the old road could not easily accommodate all the increasing traffic caused by the new presence of the government in the new city of Washington. So a private company was organized to build a turnpike between the capital and Baltimore. And as the notice in the newspaper states, it was, quote, to be built as straight a line as the nature of the ground will admit. That's one of the milestones that was put up along the way. No sooner was the prospective building of the turnpike public knowledge than Thomas Bowie, through whose farm the old road passed down towards Bladensburg, announced that he would close the old road through his property. Thomas Bowie lived in Ravenswood. His farm or plantation encompassed a great chunk of Hyattsville, downtown Hyattsville, on the west side of Route 1. Ravenswood, the house, was lost probably 70 or 80 years ago. The turnpike was built by a private company. Toll gates were located at several spots along the way. At the southern end, down at Maryland Avenue and Bladensburg Road, there was a toll gate in Cottage City near the bridge, and others scattered along the way. Among the famous personages to travel the new turnpike was Lafayette, George Washington's young aide during the American Revolution. He returned in the year 1824, making a much acclaimed tour of the United States, and he came down the turnpike. Now that was exactly 200 years ago. And Susan, can I ask now if you have any more information about those commemorations? Can you hear me, Susan? Maybe you cannot, but there is
Or maybe she can't get off mute.
Okay.
There I am. Okay.
Yes.
Okay. Yes. Well, I will read to you just a little bit. It's the trip that Lafayette made from Baltimore to Washington in October of 1824 was pretty interesting. It had some excitement attached to it. As Alan said, 2024 is the bicentennial of this visit by Lafayette to the United States. When he came back, he was 66 years old at that time, and he traveled widely for better part of a year all around. But what we were most interested in was his trip near Prince George's County and through Prince George's County. And I thought I'd read you just a little bit about the adventures that were had on the 11th of October, 1824, when he came at night from Baltimore to Washington and wanted to stop overnight at the Waterloo Tavern. They were heading for Washington. They stopped at the Waterloo, and it was quickly decided, because of uncomfortable associations of the name Waterloo in France's recent history, that this might not be such a good idea. And I will quote here from Lafayette's secretary, Auguste Levasseur, who recorded in his notes, "Night closed in upon us while on our journey, and we arrived in front of an hotel at which we were to halt. But as we were about to alight, we heard a great tumult, and an officer of the escort informed the General, Lafayette, that the name of the house was Waterloo, and inquired if it was agreeable to him to lodge there. The General replied that he would willingly go on, but he didn't want to fatigue his escort if they needed to stop. The escort said that they should not remain in a house whose name might awaken unpleasant reflections. Of course, less than 10 years earlier, Napoleon had been soundly beaten by the British at Waterloo. So Levasseur goes on to say, our escort were enraged at the innkeeper for this, the name of his inn, and they wanted to pull down the sign and would have done it if their officers had not prevented it by reminding them of the sacred right of property. In any case, we continued and spent the night at an excellent inn. Now that excellent inn happened to be what is now known as the Rossborough Inn on the campus of the University of Maryland. It was owned at that time by George Calvert of Riversdale. So I think for some of you, you're getting into familiar territory. You know Rossborough, and you know George Calvert, and you know Riversdale. And that leads to the fact that because Lafayette stayed at Rossborough that night instead of at Riversdale, where he had been invited by George Calvert, it led the very embarrassed George Calvert to write this apologia, which appeared in the Federal Republican Baltimore Telegram that week. This is a letter from George Calvert. I will cut it down quite a bit because it's long, as he tries to excuse himself for the embarrassment of not having kept Lafayette at his house. It happened that his children, his wife, Rosalie, whom Alan mentioned earlier, had died 3 years earlier in 1821. And so in 1824, George was at home with 3 of his younger children, which included Charles Benedict Calvert, who was 16 at the time. And the 2 daughters, Eugenia and Julia, were very ill at this time in October of 1824. So it was uncertain whether it would be a good idea for Lafayette to stay there. And when they began to feel better, George Calvert made sure to get a message to Lafayette that everything was fine and he would be welcome to stay at Riversdale that night. So he writes in his apology to the newspaper, a favorable change did take place, and so he would not have to lodge anywhere else. And I dispatched an express to Waterloo to reach the general and considered it unnecessary to proceed to making preparations at Rossborough because I expect him to stay at Riversdale. But I did go to Rossborough to receive him formally and to conduct him to my house at Riversdale. On the arrival of the general at Rossborough at 10 o'clock that night, that's after he had stopped briefly at Waterloo, this is George Calvert speaking now, I greeted him with the affection and respect which, in common with the nation, I sincerely felt towards him, and I invited him cordially to my house. He replied very politely that other arrangements had been made, which of course embarrassed George very much. Now back to George. As to the name of Waterloo given to the inn, to which his exception seems to have been taken, it was so designated by the late Mrs. Calvert, a Flemish lady, who possessed an estate in Flanders near that celebrated spot, and had friends engaged in that memorable conflict. As soon, however, as it was told to me that it would be complimentary to General Lafayette to alter the name and to alter the sign during his passage, I immediately gave orders to my tenant to have it done, in obedience to which the name was covered with the names Brandywine and Yorktown in distinct characters. And that's the end of the letter written by George Calvert to explain his embarrassment when Lafayette did not stay at his house. Okay, it's just a incident that I thought you'd be interested in. Go ahead.
Thank you. Well, in the time remaining, let me kind of race through a few other roads, give you a little hint of them. Annapolis Road, Route 450, is the ancient road leading from Bladensburg to Annapolis. If you were to pick William Wirt, if he came back for a visit today and you picked him up at BWI Airport and brought him down the Baltimore-Washington Parkway, he wouldn't recognize a thing. But this sign at the exit to Route 450 would probably help him get reoriented. It could have been put up in his own day. The road to Annapolis took basically the same path from Bladensburg as it does today until you got easterly to Enterprise Road Route 193. Instead of jogging to the north, as it does today, toward Nadine's hair braiding, it just barreled on straight west, heading to the bridge at Governor's Bridge Road. Governor's Bridge Road, or Governor's Bridge, long predated Priest Bridge and Buoy, which now carries 450 across the river. This notice for a stray horse near Governor's Bridge is dated 1772. The bridge and the road leading to it off of Route 301, just south of Route 50, are still open as far as I know. The bridge was closed for a while for maintenance not too long ago, but I think it's been reopened. One other change closer to Bladensburg. Today, the road from Bladensburg to Upper Marlboro, known as Landover Road, Route 202, connects to Annapolis Road at the Chevrolet Theater. That connection was not made until the 1920s. Before that, Landover Road ran along what is today the quiet street known as Quincy Street, south of and below the hill from the Bladensburg Elementary School, formerly the junior high school, and before that, the high school. It connects to Bladensburg at Bostwick. You can see on this map, Bladensburg and Marlborough Road. This is actually what is now known as Quincy Street. There was once a sunken road, or there is a sunken road in Greenbelt that few people know about. It's now closed to traffic, but it was once part of the Road to Riddles Bridge. The Road to Riddles Bridge was an extension of Edmondson Road that once cut across country across the Beltsville Agricultural Research Center to a bridge over the upper Beaver Dam Creek. It led into what was then called, quote, the forest of Prince George's County, which, as its name implied, was a heavily forested part of eastern Prince George's County. Present-day Ridge Road in northern Greenbelt was built over part of its path. And when Greenbelt was built in the 1930s, the road to Riddles Bridge was closed. This is a modern map which shows Old Edmondson Road kind of cutting across modern Kenilworth or Edmondson Road, heading up that hill, which is closed inside the green box. This is Ridge Road in northern Greenbelt, and then a cut cross country across the agricultural center to Beaver Dam Creek and Beaver Dam Road. Here it is in an 1838 aerial photo before Greenbelt was built.
1938.
This is 1938, yes, indeed. Thank you. You see it going up the hill. This is the closed portion. This is now Ridge Road. Old Greenbelt is here. And you can see a trace of the road cutting across the agricultural center. Another important road out of Bladensburg was the road to Piscataway, another port town in Prince George's County. I've highlighted the route that Dennis Griffith mapped out in 1794 in red. If you're familiar with that route today, you pretty much recognize it as Kenilworth Avenue, the Southeast Expressway, all the way down, or Route 295, all the way down to the Beltway, and then beyond maybe Oxon Hill Road or Indian Head Highway to Piscataway. But up near Bladensburg, those roads had not been built over its path. The old road persists for a mile or so as 52nd Avenue. On the left is a page from Franklin's Real Estate Atlas of Prince George's County, published in 1940. This page depicts only the east side of the road, but the west side looks similar. This is 52nd Avenue, the old road to Piscataway. It was known as River Road before it was renumbered or numbered 52nd Avenue. All these long rectangular plots, or most of them, were truck farms supplying produce to the markets of Washington, D.C. The modern map on the right shows the same area. Now you can see it's an industrial zone, but perhaps fittingly, quite a few of the warehouses are food distribution centers, still feeding the D.C. area. One of the features along the road that, let's go back for a second, that you see on the maps is Evergreen Cemetery, which is Bladensburg ancient cemetery going back to the 17th century. One of the individuals buried there is John Laird, who was a Scotsman born in 1767, who is said to have come to Bladensburg at the age of 17 and entered into the mercantile business. This is obviously a fairly young portrait of him. He married the daughter of a Georgetown merchant. He moved there. He lived until 1833, and he was buried back in Bladensburg. This was his mausoleum. There is nothing left of it anymore. In 1970, Jim Wilfong in the Prince George's Post wrote this commentary about Laird's grave. Laird had been a wealthy man, and it was a sad commentary on man's inhumanity that his grave was robbed, but that body too had been taken away. Not content with this, the brick of his mausoleum was taken away to leave only the dim outline of the early walls here on the highest point of ground in Evergreen Cemetery. I've never looked for that highest point of ground, but it was be interesting to see if there was any trace of the brick mausoleum left. One last story about the road to Piscataway, particularly its connection to the Great Falls of the Potomac, which does not sound reasonable, but here are two images, 1802 and 1922, of the Great Falls. One of the land tracts that the road to Piscataway passed through up near Bladensburg was a tract called Hudson Range. In 1771, Richard Henderson bought a portion of it. One of the corners of the property was right on the roadway. It was marked by a stone brought from the Falls of the Potomac. As you can see, I've underlined in the deed down below. That's quite a long haul to bring a stone all the way from the Potomac, but I guess they did it from the Falls of Potomac. Then lastly, very lastly, the road to Rockville. This 1896 map shows a direct connection to the Montgomery County seat, but the road dates back to the 18th century. Dennis Griffin shows it as well. It was a main route from Bladensburg to Western Maryland and beyond. It's still there, though parts of it have taken other names. I won't go into them, all of them, but part of it is Ager Road, part of it is Riggs Road. And then once you get into Montgomery County, it follows the path of what is now University Boulevard and Veers Mill Road. In fact, up until the late 1950s, University Boulevard in Montgomery County was called Old Bladensburg Road, as you can see in the clipping on the right. It was the late 1950s that it was renamed University Boulevard. And University, or Old Bladensburg Road, I've lost my cursor, there we are. When it came down to Riggs Road, it just stopped short. The road that we now know that now takes you past the University of Maryland golf course over to Route 1 really was not built until the 1960s. There was a short little lane into the agricultural center. But the modern University Boulevard, as we know it, is a modern sort of invention. So that's really all I have about the roads. So Donna, thank you, and Susan, thank you for your input.
Well, thank you, Alan. We appreciate it.
You're
I
welcome.
actually did have one question, just out of curiosity. You mentioned Ort's papers were located in North Carolina. Why North Carolina? Do you know?
Well, actually, there's several sets of papers. The biggest bulk of them are at the Library of Congress, but several of his descendants who lived no longer in Maryland or Virginia, for some reason, gave what the University of North Carolina calls the Wirt family papers to them. And years ago, Susan gave me a very rough photocopy of the pages of his manuscript about Bladensburg, and I struggled through that to extract extracts for this talk. And then I got online and I discovered, oh, they've been beautifully reproduced online. So Susan, I'll toss that photocopy set away now that there's a better copy online.
No, send it back to me because I lost a lot of stuff like that in my move.
All right.
And I'm still weeping about it.
Well, it's much easier to read online as you.
Yeah, okay.
Well, thank you, Alan, and thank you, Susan, for tonight's chat. And I thank you to our audience for joining us. If you have enjoyed this chat, think about becoming a society member if you aren't already, or making a donation. Your donations and membership help make things like tonight's history chat free for everybody. Both options can be done through our website by www.pghistory.org. And our next history chat is going to be on Monday, February 26th at 7 p.m., where we'll celebrate Black History Month with Maxine Gross and John Peter Thompson as they chat about the African American Lakeland community. So we hope you can join us for that as well. So
Can I
again,
interject,
sure.
Donna? If anybody has any questions that we didn't get to, feel free to email me at avirta2@yahoo.com. That's AVIRTA, the number 2 @yahoo.com. And I'll be glad to answer any of those questions as best I can. So,
Okay, well, I just put your email in the chat for everybody.
okay, great.
Okay. So again, thank you, Alan, and thank you everybody for joining us this evening. And I'm going to hopefully stop the chat.
Good night.
Good night.